Julia, for some reason, I'm not seeing my broadcast button here. I don't know why. Huh.
That's odd.
Very odd.
I have,
Do you
it
have
says, mine says you're in a practice sessions and a button to start webinar. Do you want me to click that? I wonder why I have that and you don't.
Oh, okay. You know what? I think that might be.
Wait, now it says the webinar has started.
Okay.
Good. And it says we're recording.
So I'm just going to migrate anybody over from the audience who should be a panelist.
Everybody, essentially.
Hey, everybody. We're just waiting for a few folks to connect. Jennifer Hughes from the MVPC is here this evening or this afternoon, and we'll be, I think, showing some slides. So Jennifer, we'll be making you a co-host so you can do that.
Andy, I'm sorry to interrupt. Sarah just notified me that she says she's in a waiting room.
There should not be a waiting room. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I'll ask her to refresh the link.
Yeah, thank you.
And yeah, unless she used the wrong link.
So Jennifer, you should be able to share screen if you'd like.
Great. Let me give that a try. I'll pull up our PowerPoint.
Oh, here she comes. Good. Okay.
No, are you seeing the right one or are you seeing the notes one?
You'll want to maximize it because we're seeing the current and next slide.
Okay, hold on. Let's see if I can get the right one. How's that?
That's much better.
Julia, is there anybody from the audience we should be pulling in at this point?
Let me pull up the, let's see, hold on a sec. Yes, we should be pulling in Bonnie. We should really be pulling in everybody. Yep, over to be a panelist.
Jennifer and Julia, we defer to you, of course, on how you want to proceed. I think we have everybody from the audience who's been allowed to be a panelist.
Okay. Do we have the mayor here? Because she was going to give us an introduction.
She's here.
Oh, she is. Okay, great.
So are we ready to start?
I think we are.
Okay, could I ask that everyone please put your, go on mute, just so that we can, eliminate background noise while I start and then turn it over to Jennifer. So welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to have us all together to talk about Newburyport hazard mitigation planning. For those of you who are new to this process, this is a required document that is critical for us to receive any type of FEMA funding. And we have had our own plan in the past, and then these last about 5 years, I think. Is that right, Jennifer? You can just nod your head, 5 years. And so then our last plan, we decided to do as a region and worked with all of the communities, or many of the communities that are part of Merrimack Valley Regional Planning Commission. And then this year we decided, well, because a lot of work has been done and we were moving in a direction so that we would be prepared, have this plan complete before we were able to apply for a federal FEMA grant program. for December. So our current plan expired the end of May. So I'm grateful to Jennifer Hughes from Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, who we contracted with to lead us through this process, and then members of our ad hoc group and Julia, Molly, and many others have been working with Jennifer to upgrade our plan. So the basis from our plan is really centers around a lot of the work that we have already accomplished. In 2016, in April, was our last regional plan that I talked about. That took us till this May. Then there was the flood resilience for riverine and coastal communities, an EPA final report that was issued in 2016 of January. The Great Marsh Coastal Adaptation Plan, that was a very, very important regional plan that I think has been presented several times and was finalized in December of 2017. And then we were very fortunate to have the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs start a new program called the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. And like our green communities, you were required to become an MVP community, and that began with a workshop where we had to identify our priorities and vulnerabilities. And we did that, applied for a grant to sort of look at what would be the best means for us to protect the wastewater treatment facility. And that work is done, as all of you know. And that was the action grant that was completed in June of 2019. And then, of course, the multi-year work that our ad hoc group did on our climate resiliency plan that was finished in October of last year, and so, or 2020. And so that takes us to where we are in the plan, and there are very specific requirements from FEMA about how we move through to finalize this plan. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
All right, thank you, Mayor Holiday, and thank you all for joining us today. Just gonna switch to my next slide here. I think back in 2018, the state actually created its first combined state hazard mitigation plan and climate adaptation plan, referred to as the SHMCAP. This link on the bottom here will take you to that plan. It's quite a thorough document, but you can see from the little design on the right here that it basically melded those two plans together. And Newburyport is already 3/4 of the way there, having done a lot of this planning work. In fact, the state in the MVP process, if your hazard mitigation plan expired at the time you were doing your MVP, allowed you to combine those two processes as well. Fortunately or unfortunately, Newburyport's plan when they did MVP was still active. So that wasn't an option, but I do think the city has already done a large part of the planning that's required to do a hazard mitigation plan. So all of you are here today because despite having done all that planning, there still needs to be a process to talk about what the city has done, how you want to prioritize that work in your hazard mitigation plan, and a few things that aren't covered by the climate resiliency plan work that you've done, which includes non-natural hazards. So largely you've been talking about natural hazards, and there are, of course, some non-natural hazards that the city needs to consider. So I'm going to stop sharing this. I guess I can tell you just a little bit more about the process after this planning meeting. We've also had 2 core team meetings with a smaller group of the Resiliency Committee. We will be putting together a draft plan. Once that draft is together, we will share it all out again, and we will hold a listening session. All of you, of course, will be invited, but it would be a larger community effort to have some input at that point as well. After that, MEMA and FEMA need to review the plan first. MEMA tends to send it back with a few comments, and those will be revised. It'll go to FEMA. FEMA will review it, and then it can be adopted by the city council if they so choose. So that's sort of the process. Any questions about what we need to do or how we're going to do it? Okay, I'm going to share again, and we are going to go to do some online polling. Sorry. Not the Zoom screen. All right, are we seeing the polling?
Yes.
Great. Is there a chat function, Julia?
There is, let's see, there's usually is a
sorry,
chat function. Not
Yeah,
seeing
sorry,
it.
just to clarify, we actually disabled the chat function because of the open meeting law. Yeah.
Okay.
It wasn't
So-
apparent to us that you would wanted that. So.
I'm gonna have to do one more share then, because I have it over here on our agenda. So to participate in the online polling, I'll need everyone to put this link here for Poll Everywhere in your browser. So you can see the HTTPS. I don't think anyone can copy off the screen, but I'll leave it up there for a couple of seconds so everyone can. Maybe just give me a thumbs up when you're seeing it.
I'm sorry, I just don't understand what you want us to do. This is
So
fine.
on your computer, if on your computer, oh, you can see it in the header above too.
Sorry, no, just to clarify, I was saying that I copied the link and the link worked and it took me to the poll.
Okay, I think actually here in the polling, you'll be able to see it again.
Just as she's pulling that up, to clarify, the idea is to be able to have in your browser the ability to answer the questions as we're going, and then Jennifer can display the results that are happening live on the screen.
Right, so I just typed in that pollev.com/MerrimackVal427 into my browser, and the poll did come up. So now I can see that in my browser next to the Zoom screen.
All right. So I'll take a second while everyone's typing these in. So the things we're going to do the polling on today come from a list of over 150 actions that the Climate Resiliency Committee pulled from your climate resilience plan. Those climate resilience actions we narrowed down to about the top, we'll condense them into about 30 actions, and we base them on different topics. This first one being water supply. So in front of you, you see some of the priority actions identified in the climate resiliency plan related to water supply. And to get a sense of what the group thinks should be the priorities for the hazard mitigation plan, we'd like you to pick your top two. And so as everyone's voting, we can see that the tallies are changing. We'll give everyone a couple of seconds to read through and make their vote. All right, so it looks like protecting water supply by purchasing and restricting conservation and abutting properties is coming out on top, with some follow-up, some competition for the number 2 spot here between writing an emergency response plan for a breach of the lower artichoke and preparing and implementing a water supply resiliency plan. Oop. Guys are making this exciting. All right. Anyone unable to vote at this point? Hopefully everyone's been able to get in here. All right. Oh, couple of stragglers there. All right, I'm going to move on to the next poll. We'll leave water supply and moved to the wastewater treatment plant. And here you can see we have 5 new action items, again, consolidated from your prior climate resiliency plan. And if for any reason you're not seeing actions you would like to see listed, we're going to have an opportunity to put in some free form responses as well. So we have some interest in preparing a feasibility study to relocate the wastewater treatment facility and continuing to construct barriers to protect the facility. Again, with storm surge and flooding being the concerns. And of note too, this plan will highlight a lot of the work that the city has already undertaken, so that those steps you've already done to protect the wastewater treatment facility will also be highlighted in a different portion of the plan. All right, thank you for those, and we'll move on to the next topic. And this is just general actions to protect infrastructure outside of water and wastewater. These include general flood resiliency measures, improving street sidewalks, bike lanes for livable streets, encouraging and supporting protection of critical assets like the National Grid substation. I'll let you read through. Looks like there's some great support for flood resiliency measures, as well as increasing the use of renewable energy. Some support for livable streets and the substation. But it looks like flood protection measures and reducing fossil fuel across the city are some key actions. All right, moving on. Next, we talk priority actions to address the waterfront neighborhoods and amenities, including Cashman Park. A little wordy, but hopefully everybody can see that. And again, all of these actions are already fully outlined in your climate resiliency plan, and we're just sort of getting a sense of which ones should go in the priority actions for the hazard mitigation plan. That plan is a 5-year plan, and obviously not everything can be accomplished during a 5-year period. All right, it looks like some equal support for education and outreach to the waterfront committees, the chamber, business and property owners, as well as doing some projection and inundation timeline scenarios for that region, as well as potentially some new regulations in the flood zones. All right, thanks everyone for taking the time to read those through. Next up, we have priority actions for Plum Island, a subject that's been further addressed recently with some work, MVP work related specifically to sea level rise in Plum Island. And again, this is one of those topics that the community definitely has more than, 6 options in the resiliency plan, but certainly these capture a lot of the most discussed and highest rated from some of your other planning work. So it looks like a task force to develop in some long-term sustainable science-based plans for the challenges facing Plum Island, as well as engaging the community to discuss shoreline retreat. Looks like also some alternative access option discussions would be desired. All right. Thanks. I think that one showed a lot of activity. So now moving on to regulatory and budgetary actions that the city can take to mitigate hazards and provide resiliency. Again, a little wordy, but some all coming from existing plans that the city has. All right. Not surprisingly, still a lot of support for getting an automated system to predict or inform residents of the health risks associated with CSOs, as well as talking about some potential new regulations to address development in hazard areas. Last option there. And some support also for changes in evaluating revenue streams once some of those coastal properties are no longer within the city's revenue. All right. Next, focusing a little more on education and outreach actions that the city can take for hazard mitigation and resiliency. All right, looks like a lot of support for developing emergency plans for the city to prepare for the increasing climate change risks, as well as some support down the bottom there for tracking municipal carbon footprint and evaluating progress toward net zero goals. There are some really good tools out there for that these days, even down to the residential household level. And some support in there for school-based programs. All right. Look to be leveling out a little bit. Looks like people have figured out too, you can change your mind. All right. And then here's one of those important things for the hazard mitigation plan. And we did invite to this meeting, although I don't see any of them on here, your neighboring municipalities, the town administrators were invited, because some things, can't be handled at the local level. And it would be great to be working on some of these challenges with partners. So these are the types of things that the city may have considered working on. Certainly with the Merrimack River, we've had the Merrimack River District Commission, and some of these things just by nature are regional, like the MBTA. And I know you already are doing some work with your neighbor, given that your water supply lies partly in West Newbury. Right. That looks great. Thanks for your input on that. I think that'll be really helpful in updating that section of the hazard mitigation plan. And then finally, we get to some more open-ended discussion. And if you don't want to type it in, you can certainly unmute yourself. But, just thinking, are there vulnerabilities or resiliency and mitigation actions that we should be considering that you feel haven't been brought out in either prior planning processes or in the things we've talked about today? I mean, certainly there are other issues outside of sea level rise and flooding. Extreme heat is certainly something that our communities are starting to think a lot about. We've seen parts of the world, parts of the country experiencing those things that have never experienced them before. Certainly changes in wildlife and disease-borne, sort of tick-borne and other illnesses are a concern to some folks. Any other things people want to chat about here? Seabrook, someone got ahead of me. It's on our next slide. We will be talking a little bit about some of our non-natural hazards in the next slide. Yeah, we didn't. Your resiliency plan certainly does address the business park and flooding there, so that it's great that it's brought up here. You can also, if you think one of these items is of interest to you as well, you can thumbs up, hit it, and we'll know that more than one person sees that as a priority. These are great. All right. Marsh restoration and living shorelines. That's a great one. Thanks for putting that in there. Now we see a little bit of voting going on. First responder issues when the turnpike is flooded. All right, these are great. Emergency generators. Yes, definitely been some talk. We are continuing to meet with the Resiliency Committee and staff throughout Newburyport to update some of the parts of the plan. If you haven't seen the Newburyport section of the prior hazard mitigation plan, the link to it is on the resiliency page of the Newburyport website. And so please feel free if you have any updates or things from that plan that you think we should focus on to share them. All right, these are great. So we're going to move on next to, as I promised, the non-natural hazards that should be in Newburyport's hazard mitigation plan. These are all of the things that were in the regional plan. we don't have to include all of these in the local plan. I have written 2 local plans recently, and we didn't focus on all of these items, but what you deem is important for Newburyport is what we're interested in here. So a nuclear event, not surprisingly, receiving some votes, as well as water contamination and waterborne illness, something that was brought up in your resiliency plan as well. It's great. Chemical and hazard material spills, we have had some discussions. Members of the fire department have attended at least one of our meetings, so that's great. And thank you, Chief, for being here today. All right, that's great. Thanks for your input on that. And then, you know, if in thinking about those non-natural hazards, especially the nuclear events, the chemical spills, are there any specific actions that you think the city should be looking at, preparing to do, adding to the plan? We'll certainly be taking actions from the prior plan that are ongoing and don't need to change. But if there's anything new on the non-natural hazard front that you think should be in here. Great. Support some monitoring of concrete issues. Update from National Grid on what they're doing for resiliency. Does anyone in the audience want to spell out LEPC for us? Evacuation procedures. Great. Actually, do we have our National Grid contact here today? I know.
We do not. Nope.
No. Okay. I did see that they were, I will reach out to them as well and see if they have anything to add. All right, this is great input. Ensuring emergency responders have the equipment they need. Municipally provide public information on status of nuclear power plant issues. Okay. Well, this is great. We will be making certain that these things are discussed and make it into the plan. All right, I think this is pretty much all I've prepared to update us. Is there anyone who wants to talk about any specific issue or has any comments or? We are in the process of drafting the plan now. There's a lot of data that gets pulled into the plan, some information from the National Flood Insurance Program, lists of hazardous bridges and dams, if they exist and where they are. So we do a land use analysis to talk about property that lies within the floodplain. There'll be some mapping that goes on for critical infrastructure and what exists in the different hazard zones. So lots of things still to be done, but so much information that Newburyport already has that I'm hoping this will be a less of a lift than it would otherwise be, because you have all done so much planning prior to this point. And
Jennifer, a quick question.
Sure.
Maybe for the group. As you mentioned, this is a planning session that we're doing today with all these people who we've invited as stakeholders. But after this, there'll be a public information session. There'll be 2 of those listening sessions, essentially. One where the city council will be asked to adopt the plan. But for the first one and for the second one, I'm just wondering if the participants here today have any thoughts, recommendations, concerns about those listening sessions, how they think that they should go, anything they think should be added or taken away from what we've seen here today.
And also the timing, Jennifer.
Right. I mean, we want to be having the listening session in September, because ideally after that, the plan goes to MEMA. They generally take about a month to review the plan. That's been my experience. Just recently, I submitted a plan to FEMA, and the turnaround time from FEMA was much shorter. I think they were like barely 3 weeks. So just factoring that into needing to have the plan accepted prior to the December timeframe to apply is important. So I think we're looking for the first listening session to be towards the end of September if possible. And that's when we can submit the plan to MEMA.
Okay, great. So we only have to have the first listening session prior to submitting the plan to MEMA.
Right. Yep. The last listening session is more or less, or hopefully a meeting with the city council where there'll be more the option for public comment and comment from the city councilors. But at that point, we would be looking also at that same meeting to adopt the plan. So.
Could I chime in by any chance?
Sure, of course.
Sure. This is Sharif. I serve as the Ward 1 City Councilor. So I'm going to take Julie up on her question just to keep it brief, but just a couple thoughts. One is my experience is that, master plans can, which in a sense this is for a specific topic, but it's sort of a master plan. The times when they get gummed up the most is when they try and tackle specific policy questions when we're not really directly addressing those policy questions, if that's the way I could say it. So in other words, if there are recommendations in here that say, you should adopt this or you should do that, and they're squarely in the space of the city council, I would anticipate that being a challenge. That's just from my experience on other things. We have other master plans or large kind of plan things. So oftentimes there's a section that says, here's a recommendation, and especially if they're sensitive recommendations, we're not really taking up those as a matter of policy now. So that's what I'm trying to suggest can be a challenge. Take that for what it's worth. The second thing is that in terms of these public hearings, the city council, of course, it already has a structure in terms of how we do meetings and referral to committees and things like that. So my suggestion is, I would contact the city council president and just make sure that he is aware that this is something you intend to bring in, and I would defer to him. I don't want to try and speak for anybody else as to what might be suggested, because if you're anticipating wanting a meeting of the entire city council, for example, that's something that we have our whole meeting schedule set for the year. So it may be that it fits into an existing meeting. It may be that it goes to committee, which is our typical structure. I'm not actually sure exactly which the right committee would be. There are some other counselors on this call, or at least one who may chime in, but maybe this goes to public safety. There's an aspect there. Maybe, there's a planning aspect to it. There are different pieces. So I think in terms of, priming the city council for receipt of this, it makes sense to reach out so that it doesn't just walk in. And Andy, I'm sure, can help with that since he helps coordinate a lot of these things, and Julia too, knows that kind of how some of the council stuff works. So those are my two thoughts. And my understanding is that, this plan does need to be adopted by the city council. So in the past, to be honest, we have simply accepted or acknowledged receipt of the plan, but we haven't taken a vote on it. And so I don't think that's necessarily an option here. So there's a better, just to do it the best way possible to give it the highest chance of a good outcome. Those are my two thoughts.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying, but certainly like the last plan, the probably the meat of this plan is the action plan. You can find it. I think it's I'd have to look back at the old plan, but there's specific action plan. It's in table format. We will need to recreate that same table using the actions, some of the actions that we've discussed. So if it makes sense to kind of get that action table in front of everyone is sooner rather than later, we can certainly do that.
The other thing that I would like to add is that it's a 5-year plan. So I think that that has to be considered when you're looking at, the items that you're putting forward. I know that, I've been pushing back because we've just spent $36 million on upgrading the wastewater treatment plant and another $1 million to protect it and have more work to do. And now we're talking about relocating the plant. That's probably not going to happen for 30 years or something. So is that really one of the action plans we want to put in this 5-year plan? I don't know. I also think that I'm going to take it a little bit further than Sharif did, but the people on Plum Island are incredibly sensitive. And when some ordinances were tried to be submitted earlier this spring, it really backfired. So I think that there has to be, we all know that, Plum Island is going to have serious erosion. We've seen the inundation, we've seen what's going to happen in the future, but we're talking about the next 5 years. So I would just be sensitive how that piece of information is put together. If we want to look at, maybe the task force with Newbury to talk about what makes sense as, more erosion occurs, that way, as opposed to saying, okay, let's develop strong ordinances and have a retreat plan in place. Obviously, down the road, that's where we have to be. But I would say that, we really need to look at, of all the things that were identified, what are the things that are really important for the next 5 years?
Understood. I think that helps.
If I could chime in,
Great.
just I noticed on some of the slides, the nuclear plant came up, and of all the things I worry about on a day-to-day basis, that's not one of them. And we already have RERP emergency plans to go with the plant, and there's federal regulations on that. So the things that need to happen in the near future, we already have. We worry about the transportation routes. We worry about the decay of the bridges. So our existing infrastructure needs some help. Working with National Grid on the resiliency of the power grid and what happens during storms and how we get our power back. Because once we lose the water of the power, we lose the water, the sewer, everything else. And that leads me to our Achilles heel, which is our shelters. We actually have one working shelter, and that doesn't even belong to us. That's Salvation Army. The generators on the schools only power portions of the schools, so we're going to need to have some funds to upgrade generators and what they handle in the schools that we consider shelters. We do have a generator in the process of being hooked up in the senior center to give us a little more leeway there. But the transportation routes that we already have, the chemicals that are on those transportation routes and are in our industrial park, and the existing problems that we have as far as shelters is the stuff that I think needs to be addressed right away. Because if we can't relocate our people and can't get them across routes that we consider to be evacuation routes, everything else is going to fail. Just my thoughts.
Very important and duly noted. All right. Anyone on the call? I thank you, Matt, for joining us from the reservation. It's good to have some regional, and I see someone here from Senator DeZoglio's office. Anyone have any thoughts on regional issues or anything else we should be discussing from a regional standpoint? All right, I think we've gotten a lot of input and a lot of information, and I'll look forward to meeting again with the Resiliency Committee, and we'll start to pull this all together and get some drafts circulating for everyone to review. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Nice job.
Thank you,
I like these
Jennifer.
short, sweet, lot of information, well organized. We get through and we're
Yeah.
out in 44 minutes. Good job.
All right.
The
Nicely
poll
done,
was
Jennifer.
excellent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank
All
you.
right.
I'll
Have a
say-
great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, you too.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.